I've been the outside employment lawyer for one of the largest medical cannabis dispensaries in the state of Illinois since their inception. So I've been working with them from the very beginning when they first started up and dealing with all of their HR-related issues, getting their employee handbook in place, doing training for them. So we've really run the gamut with them, and I've got some valuable experience that hopefully I'll be able to help you with today. Unfortunately, because it's dark up here, I got to wear these because I can't see anymore, which is also a product of my age.
I'm much younger than
So Exhibit Q is the Labor and Employment Practices Plan. As Amy said, this is optional, but again, the regulators are going to encourage you to do this even though it says it's optional. It's worth only 5 points. The page limit is 10 pages, not including a copy of a labor peace agreement, statement, or attestation, and we're going to talk about what that means in a few minutes. So what they want you to do is describe what you're going to do to maintain a safe, healthy, and wonderful work environment for all of your employees. What that'll involve is a number of things. And so what I wanted to mention, I kind of am looking at this in 2 different ways. If you have already been an established business operator, you're a little bit ahead of the game, because what you can do is you can basically describe, I think it's in Exhibit N, what your experience has been. That's where you put your resume or your CV that explains what your experience has been. And what you can do is cross-reference in Exhibit Q what you told the regulators earlier in the application about what you did as a successful business operator in your prior profession before you went into selling recreational cannabis. But what you're going to want to do is highlight the labor and employment policies and practices that are specifically beneficial to employees. Because as we all know, there are policies that we can put in place that are beneficial to employees, and there are policies that we can put in place that are basically, this is what you can't do, this is what I'm going to fire you for, and that sort of thing. And that's certainly part of a labor and employment practices plan. But one of the things they really want you to focus on in Exhibit Q is what you're going to do that is going to benefit the people that are going to be working for you. And what you're going to want to do is, hold on, is explain your code of conduct. So in your existing business, and again, I'm going to talk, for those of you who have not operated businesses, we're going to get there too, but talk about what your code of conduct is. List the employee benefits that you currently offer your employees in your existing business. Confirm that you pay your employees a living wage. Now, what's a living wage? Well, one of the ways you can find out is MIT has what they call a living wage calculator. I gave you the link right there on this slide. And what you do when you click on that link is it takes you to a web page where you click on your state. So for all of us, that would be the state of Illinois. And then it lists every county in the state of Illinois. So for example, I'd click on Cook. And then it tells you what the living wage is for your employees. And it explains it based on whether it's a 1-income household or a 2-income household, and how many kids are being supported in that household. And it tells you what you need to pay in order for it to constitute a living wage. It's not the same as minimum wage. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in a few minutes about what an example of that might look like. If you've had union employees, explain your track record for peacefully and successfully working with the union. And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. And summarize the other policies and practices that you have in place that benefit your employees in your existing business or the prior business that you ran. And then tell the regulators in Exhibit Q, I've done this before and I'm going to replicate it in my cannabis business. I've been a successful business operator and I'm going to do exactly the same thing when I run a cannabis business. Now, there might be those of you in the room who have not been operators or owners of a business. And so for those of you who have or haven't, we're going to talk about what policies you might want to put in place that show the regulators that you're going to be treating your employees extremely well. Now, I could stand here and list every single policy that I think, as an employment lawyer, that you should have in place in a policy manual for your employees. But as Amy said, we're kind of running out of time, and you've been sitting there a really long time, even before I got here. So we're going to race through this pretty quickly. Some of it may be intuitive, some of it may not. But let me run through it with you. So one thing that you absolutely want to have in place is an equal employment opportunity, anti-harassment, anti-discrimination policy. Confirm that you're going to hire and promote and pay regardless of a person's race, national origin, gender, disability, LGBTQ status, all the types of protected characteristics that you're not even going to consider when you decide who you're going to hire in your business and who you're going to keep on. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier when Liz was up here, tell the regulators that you're going to do harassment compliance training, because effective January 1 in the state of Illinois, you've got to do it sexual harassment training once a year for all of your employees. So let them know that you know that and you're going to be doing that, because they're going to know that that's the law, obviously. A reasonable accommodation policy. Confirm that you're committed to providing a reasonable accommodation for people with disabilities and people for their religious and cultural observances. Tell the regulators that. And this is stuff that I know all of you would do anyway, but put it down in the application and let them know. Workplace violence. Confirm that you won't tolerate violence in the workplace and let them know that you're going to put a plan in place in the event that violence does occur. Let them know that you're not going to tolerate weapons in the workplace. Something that's, again, these two things are going to show them that you're going to maintain a safe work environment for your employees. Confirm that you'll comply with OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, and there's going to be a bunch of stuff that you're going to have to really bone up on in terms of safely running your business. And what's interesting here is, so I got a kick out of this actually. So we all know cannabis is still illegal at the federal level, right? OSHA is a federal law. So even though you're a cannabis business and they don't recognize that it's legal under federal law, you still have to comply with the federal law when it comes to safety. All right? So that's a little ironic, I think. Wages and overtime. We talked about this a second ago. Confirm that you're going to pay all of your employees a living wage, and confirm that for your non-exempt employees, primarily that's going to be your hourly folks, that you're going to pay them overtime, time and a half, if they work more than 40 hours in a work week, which is required by federal and state law. So I mentioned that MIT living wage calculator. So here's an example. In Cook County, the current minimum wage is $12 an hour. The living wage for a person in a dual wage earner home with 2 kids, $17.21 an hour. So if you're going to tell the regulators that you're going to pay a living wage, that's the kind of money we're talking about for an hourly worker.
Could you repeat that, please?
Sure. So if you go to that link that I gave you, which is https://livingwage.mit.edu/. Now, if you just Google living wage calculator MIT, it's going to pop up, which is probably easier than memorizing the link I just gave you.
Remember, you don't all have to be taking pictures, like, we're going to give you this.
Okay. And so when you go there, you click on state, you click on county, and it's going to show you a grid of, by county, if there's a single income household or a dual income household, and then depending on how many number of kids are in that household, what the living wage needs to be. All right? Paid time off and leave. Explain who will be eligible for paid time off. Now, typically, hourly workers aren't eligible for paid time off. In most businesses that I represent, they don't give paid vacation time to an hourly worker, for example. But be aware that there is a sick leave ordinance in Cook County and in the city of Chicago that requires you to provide paid sick leave to every single employee, regardless of whether they are full-time, part-time, or temporary. It's not a lot of sick leave. It's like 40 hours a year, so it's not much, but it is required. So you might want to mention that you will comply with the sick leave ordinance and provide paid sick leave to your employees. What benefits are you going to offer? Now, the application specifically mentions retirement and education. So this is where you would explain, well, I'm going to provide health insurance. I'm going to provide a 401k plan. I'm going to provide tuition reimbursement or educational reimbursement if my employees want to go out there and get better educated to help them in their job. Those are the kinds of things that I think the regulators are going to want to see. We talked about a code of conduct, which is specifically mentioned on the application. So this is where you're going to talk about making sure that your employees, telling your employees you want them to be honest, you want them to have integrity, you don't want them fighting in the workplace, that sort of thing, which not only benefits you as a business operator, but it also benefits your employees. I would also recommend a dispute resolution policy. which basically talks about ways that you're going to help your employees resolve disputes within your company before they have to go to a government agency, before they have to go to court, how you're going to help them resolve disputes peacefully, internally at your business. It's going to help them. It's also going to help you because it will save you money so that you're not at places like the EEOC or in federal court. Now, if you end up having union employees, disputes are going to end up being resolved through the grievance procedure. That's going to be in the collective bargaining agreement, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't remind them that if they have an issue, that they can come talk to you about it before they go through a formal process. Now, those are kind of the meat and potatoes of what I would say your employee practices plan should be. There's certainly plenty of other policies that you can include. And like I said, some of these are not necessarily for the benefit of the employee as much as they're for the benefit of you and your business, but it all depends on spin. So for example, when you talk about the hours of work and the breaks you're going to provide to your employees, giving breaks to your employees is a good thing. And by the way, under Illinois law, if somebody is going to work for you for a shift that's at least 7.5 hours, you're supposed to give them a 20-minute meal break no later than 5 hours into their work period. It's under a law called the 1-day rest in 7 law. I get a kick out of the name of that. And of course, breastfeeding employees need to be given time to express their breast milk, which is also required under federal and state law. And you can mention that. Absenteeism and tardiness, you can explain what procedures you will have your employees follow if they need to be absent or show up late or leave early. If you decide you want to have a dress code, or if you want your employees to wear your branded attire, like the lovely Gromentum t-shirts you see displayed everywhere here, whatever the name of your dispensary is going to be, that's where you can mention that you're going to have a standard attire and appearance policy. Hygiene and cleanliness I mentioned because you're selling product that people are going to consume. So how many of you have worked in the restaurant industry? Anybody here? Right? So in the restaurant industry, there's plenty of rules that are put in place, for example, regular hand washing and hygiene. And for an industry like cannabis, that's critically important and something that you might want to mention on the application. So whenever I bring up drugs and alcohol in this type of room, people get a kick out of it. So in a typical business, for a typical employee handbook that we would write for a business, we'd have rules in place about not using alcohol and not using drugs, and that we do drug testing for our employees. I certainly think it's a good idea to have a policy in place that tells your employees that they can't be impaired at work. I am not going to be naive enough to think that your employees are not going to be using cannabis at some point in their lives while they're your employees. But you can certainly tell them that they are not allowed to come to work impaired, and you can also tell them that they're not allowed to use on the job. I don't think that in an industry like this, you're going to be doing drug testing. I'm just saying. So I would not recommend saying on your application that you're going to be strict about drug testing or even putting that in your policies because it just ain't practical. And discipline is something that I would typically see in an employee handbook. Again, if you end up with union employees, there's going to be a strict process that's in the collective bargaining agreement that talks about like verbal warning, written warning. It's very strict progressive discipline. For your non-union employees, or if you are, shall I say, fortunate enough not to end up having union workers, which is going to be very unlikely, but okay, I don't recommend a strict progressive disciplinary policy because I like you to have as much flexibility as you can to deal with your employees on a case-by-case basis. And again, I could stand up here for another hour and talk to you about all the different types of policies that you might want to put in place, but we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to move on to the next slide, which is really the last piece of the labor and employment practices plan section in the application. So I mentioned at the very beginning that the application says it's a 10-page limit, not including a copy of a labor peace agreement statement or attestation. Now, it's not explicitly stated in the statute, and it's not explicitly stated on the application, but our understanding is that in order to get the full 5 points for this optional section, you're going to need to include in your application a statement that you will enter into a labor peace agreement. But if you're going to say that on the application, I want you to know what you're agreeing to. So if you enter into a labor peace agreement with a union, at a minimum, that agreement is going to say that you'll agree not to disrupt the union's efforts to communicate with and attempt to organize and represent your employees. So you got to let the union talk to your employees and try to get them to join. You'll also agree to give the union access at reasonable times to the areas in which your employees work for the purpose of meeting with your employees to discuss their right to representation, employment rights under state law, and terms and conditions of employment. So not only are you going to agree to let the union have access to your people, you're going to agree that the union can come on site in order to do that. Excuse me.
I have a question about that.
Yeah, hold on. You also can't mandate that there be a particular mode of election or certification of the union. So you can't say that there's got to be like a secret election or a ballot or something like that. They've got to be able to vote for the union in whatever way that they want to if you enter into a labor peace agreement. And in exchange for all those things that you're agreeing to, the union and its members will agree not to picket, engage in a work stoppage, boycott, or other economic interference with your business. Now, I want to just make one thing really clear. At the time you're applying for your license, you don't need to enter into the agreement. You don't need to attach the agreement to your application and submit it to the regulators. All they're looking for is a statement or an attestation that says that you will enter into a labor peace agreement with the union if you are approached by the union and asked to do so. Now, Amy came across in her travels and exploration a form that someone gave her that seems to come from IDFPR that can be used for you to, as your statement or attestation to attach to your application. But in my humble opinion, well, first of all, we have not been able to verify that the form actually came from IDFPR. And in my humble opinion, the form absolutely makes no sense whatsoever, because what this form requires you to do, under penalties of perjury, is to say that you have already been approached by a union to enter into a labor peace agreement, and that you will be entering into a labor peace agreement with that union. And I would venture to guess that at the stage that we all are at now in the application process, many of you, if not most of you, have not yet been contacted by a union because they don't know who you are yet. So there's this form that we think may have come from IDFPR, but we're not really sure. But it just makes no sense, and you're signing it under penalties of perjury. So we'll make the form available if you'd like to see it, but I want you to be very, very careful about it. And in the coming weeks and months, what we're going to be doing is trying to find out if there actually is an official form from IDFPR. I came across one from the state of California that makes a hell of a lot more sense.
You already don't like that one.
I didn't love it, but I liked it a lot more than this one because it gave you options. It said one option was, I've been approached by a union and I have signed. Another option was, I've been approached by a union and I will sign. Another one was, I haven't been approached by a union yet, but if I am approached by a union, I will sign.
Sign what exactly?
The labor peace agreement, which is an agreement between you, the operator, and the union, where you're making some concessions, the ones that I mentioned about letting them on site, letting them talk to your employees and so forth, and they're saying they won't engage in a work stoppage or a boycott or a picket. So it's sort of a quid pro quo. Now, one thing I will say is that there are some grumblings out there that this requirement that businesses enter into a labor peace agreement may be unconstitutional because it may be preempted by the federal law, the National Labor Relations Act. So it's possible that in the coming months, somebody is going to test the law by going into court and asking a judge to hold it unlawful that they included this in the cannabis statute. But that's sort of putting us all on the edge of our seats and waiting to see if somebody decides to go ahead and do that.
But anyway, what you may find out there as people are, you know, when we started out this whole conversation, we talked about the fact that there are a lot of people who want to make money on the fact that you may not have full information about it. There are people, I've talked to 2 so far, who will tell you that if you do not have this in place, you're not going to get your full 5 points. And the truth of the matter is if you fully do the things that Sheryl has told you about, especially if you have a history of owning a business where you've already done it, but not only, but especially if that's just not a true statement. Like, it's not bad for you to do it if you believe that you want to have a labor piece, by all means do that and get that, and there's no problem with you doing it, but to fall prey to being intimidated by not having that language is the issue that we're trying to bring up.
Yeah. Think very hard about whether that's something you do want to agree to, because like everybody has said today, if you say in your application you're going to enter into a labor peace agreement and you don't, that's not going to bode well. So, sir, yes.
When you're talking about, well, first of all, what kind of union is protecting cannabis workers?
What's the name? Does anyone know the name of the union that's in place? I can't think of.
SCIU.
SCIU. What's the
I'm so, I should know it. Hold on, I have it. I do.
How is it that a national union could represent a worker that deals with a product that's considered illegal federally?
So there's going to be a local for the federal union. Okay, so it's a local, and by the way, I'm not a big fan of unions. I'm just not. I feel like if you treat your employees well, you don't need a union, right? Right? And so if you explain to your employees and you treat them fairly and you pay them a good wage and you communicate with them on a regular basis and let them know that they have an avenue internally to deal with disputes, I don't think you need a union. The state wants you to have a union, all right? And so that's why they included this.
Why?
It's all about the almighty dollar, okay? I mean, that's what all of this is all about. All right.
UFCW is the local 881 UFCW. That is the union that organizes in this industry. And if you need contact with them, if you want contact with them, I can give you contact. I talked to the guy last night. I talk to them all the time. So you can get it. We want to give you that information. We just didn't want you to be influenced without knowing all the facts.
Right.
And it's up to you.
And again, this section of the application is 5 measly points. So,
5 points a lot.
okay. But I want you to think about whether it's something you want to do in agreeing to do it. Don't just blindly say, I will agree to enter into a labor peace agreement. Educate yourselves. Google labor peace agreement. Learn about the effect of them and what they do, which unfortunately I don't have time to explain today. But make an educated decision about whether that's something that you want to agree to.
Awesome.
Okay?
Sheryl, thank you. All right, everybody.